The harbor was always full of life. Boats of every size rested by the water, some small and wooden, others shiny and modern. Among them, one yacht stood out. It was large, elegant, and painted in pure white, but instead of moving proudly across the sea, it remained tied to the dock. For months it had not been used, and people whispered about it every day. They said the rich woman who owned it was frustrated and angry because no one could fix it. The woman was known in the town for her wealth and pride. She lived in a big house near the coast and liked to show her power through her possessions. The yacht was her favorite symbol of luxury, and now that it was broken, she felt humiliated. Every morning she came to the harbor with her expensive clothes and strong voice, demanding updates from the engineers who worked on the boat. Her words were sharp, and her tone was filled with impatience. At first, she had called the most famous engineers from the city. They arrived with shiny tools, laptops, and new machines. They promised her quick solutions and charged large amounts of money. Each one tested the yacht, replaced different parts, and ran long checks. The woman waited, sometimes walking up and down the dock with her arms crossed, sometimes watching from her chair with her sunglasses on. But after hours of effort, the result was always the same. The yacht refused to start. One engineer said the problem was in the fuel system, so he replaced the pipes. Another said the issue was in the engine, so he ordered new parts. Yet another thought it was the electrical wiring, so he spent days trying to rewire it. None of these attempts worked. Each time, when they failed, the woman's face became red with anger. She scolded them in front of everyone and reminded them how much she was paying. Still, the yacht stayed silent like a stubborn giant refusing to move. As weeks turned into months, her frustration grew. She invited more engineers, not just from the city but from other towns too. The number of men who had tried to repair the yacht reached 30. Every one of them had failed. The dock became a place of gossip. Fishermen laughed quietly, saying even the smartest men could not handle the rich woman's boat. Children pointed at the yacht as they played, wondering why such a beautiful thing did not work. The woman, however, did not take the failure lightly. To her, it was a personal insult. She believed her money could buy the best solutions, and yet her problem remained. Her pride would not let her admit defeat. So every day she returned, stood tall, and waited for someone new to try. On one particular morning, the sun was bright and the sea breeze was strong. The woman arrived again, her heels clicking against the wooden planks of the dock. Her voice echoed as she shouted at the latest engineer who had failed. "Is this what I'm paying for? 30 of you, and still no one can fix my boat," she exclaimed. People nearby turned their heads, some amused, others uncomfortable. Near the edge of the dock stood a poor man with his young daughter. He was not there to laugh or gossip. He was waiting for a small job, as he often did. His clothes were old but clean, and his hands showed signs of hard work, rough and strong from years of labor. His daughter, no more than 9 years old, stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. They often spent mornings together at the harbor because he could not afford to leave her alone at home. The poor dad usually repaired small things. Sometimes it was a broken fishing net, sometimes a bicycle chain, and sometimes a leaking wooden boat. People trusted him for simple jobs because he was patient and honest. But no one thought of him as an expert for something grand like a luxury yacht. He did not even think of himself that way. Yet as he watched the scene unfold, his daughter noticed something different. She saw how calm her father was compared to the angry woman and the nervous engineers. She tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Papa, maybe you can fix it." The father shook his head softly. "That boat is not like the ones I know, little one. It belongs to her world, not ours," he replied gently. But the woman, hearing voices behind her, turned and noticed the man standing there. Her eyes narrowed, and her pride pushed her words out like arrows. "You there?" she called out loudly, making everyone turn toward him. "If you're so smart, then fix my boat." The dock fell silent. Some people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Others watched carefully, wondering if the poor dad would answer. He looked down at his daughter, whose eyes were wide with hope. For her, he was always the man who could fix anything. A chair with a broken leg, a kite with torn paper, even a toy missing a wheel. To her, he was stronger than all the engineers. Her little hand squeezed his, and her quiet voice gave him courage. "Try, Papa," she said with a smile. The poor dad hesitated, not because he lacked skill, but because he feared the woman's anger if he failed. Still, he slowly walked toward the yacht, carrying his old rusty toolbox. The woman raised her eyebrows as if watching a clown step into a stage. "Go on," she said with a smirk. "Entertain me." As he climbed aboard, whispers spread among the crowd. Some mocked, "He will never manage." Others said, "Maybe he will surprise us." The daughter stood at the dock, her small figure straight and proud, her eyes following her father's every move. The man did not rush. He placed his hand gently on the side of the yacht as if greeting it. He looked around carefully, listening to the way the wind passed through its parts, feeling the rhythm of the machine that had remained silent for too long. Where others had hurried with their fancy tools, he began with patience. He bent down, checked the lower panels, and listened closely to the quiet clicks when he touched the engine. For the first time in months, someone was not treating the yacht as a broken machine but as something that could speak, if only one listened carefully. His calm manner began to capture the attention of those around him. Even the woman, though still smirking, leaned forward slightly, curious in spite of herself. The little girl's voice rang out from the dock, soft but strong. "Go, Papa. You can do it." And at that moment, the story of 30 engineers failing and a poor dad beginning to try was set in motion. The poor dad stood on the deck of the yacht, and for a moment, he felt the eyes of everyone on the dock pressing down on him. He was not wearing a uniform like the engineers. His toolbox looked old and scratched, nothing like the shiny cases of the experts before him. His clothes were simple and his hands were rough, but he carried with him something they had all forgotten: patience and quiet observation. He slowly opened his box and took out a few simple tools: a small wrench, a screwdriver, and a cloth he used for wiping grease. His daughter watched proudly from the dock, clutching the railing as if she could give him strength through her gaze. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "You can do it, Papa." The rich woman crossed her arms and leaned against the railing of the yacht. Her eyes carried both annoyance and amusement. "This should be interesting," she muttered to herself. Some people standing nearby chuckled while others leaned closer, curious to see what the poor dad would actually do. The man didn't start by unscrewing anything. Instead, he walked slowly around the deck, touching the panels, listening to faint noises and breathing calmly. He bent near the engine area and tapped lightly, as if asking the yacht to speak to him. He noticed details others had overlooked: tiny marks of dust near the pipes, a strange smell near the fuel tank, and a slight delay in the way the switches clicked. One of the engineers who had failed earlier stood by, shaking his head. "This is pointless," he whispered to another. "He has no special equipment. He doesn't even have the knowledge for this kind of machine." The other engineer nodded, but their eyes did not leave the poor dad's hands. Something about his calmness was different. The father remembered his childhood. He had spent long hours with his own father repairing fishing boats that were far older than him. Those boats had no modern systems, only wood, metal, and ropes. But he had learned to listen to the sea, to the boat's heartbeat, and to find problems that could not be seen by the eye alone. That experience was etched in his memory, and though this yacht was modern, its soul was still a boat. He crouched near the engine chamber and asked politely, "May I open this?" The woman raised her eyebrows but nodded. "Go ahead. Break it if you must. It's already useless." Her words carried arrogance, but the man ignored them. He carefully unscrewed the cover, his daughter shining her small flashlight from the dock to help him see. The light flickered on the metal, and the crowd noticed how focused he became. He did not rush. Instead, he studied each pipe, each valve, and each connection. He ran his fingers along the lines, feeling for something unusual. He smelled the fuel system, closing his eyes for a moment, letting his instincts guide him. His daughter called softly, "Papa, do you see something?" He smiled back at her. "Not yet, little one. But every boat tells a story. I just need to hear it." The engineers around scoffed, whispering that boats do not tell stories. But the older fishermen in the crowd nodded. They knew what he meant. A boat, like a person, gave signs when something was wrong. One just needed patience to understand. Minutes passed, and the dock grew quieter. People began to feel a strange tension, as if something important was about to happen. The poor dad reached into his toolbox and pulled out a thin wire. With it, he gently tested the inside of one of the pipes. Suddenly, the wire touched something soft. He frowned slightly and tried again. Yes, something was stuck inside. He did not pull it out yet, but he knew he was closer. His daughter's eyes widened. She did not know what he had found, but she trusted that her father was moving toward the answer. "You always find the problem, Papa," she whispered proudly. The woman, however, still looked doubtful. "What are you even doing?" she asked loudly. 30 trained engineers already checked every inch of that engine. You think your little screwdriver and wire will do what their machines could not?" Her voice was sharp, but inside she felt a tiny spark of fear. What if this poor man succeeded where all her expensive experts had failed? The father did not respond to her sarcasm. He continued carefully, taking apart only what was necessary, never wasting time. His hands moved with confidence, showing years of experience. His face was calm and his daughter's light never wavered. The engineers who had mocked him earlier now leaned forward. They could not believe how precise he was with such simple tools. He checked one more valve, tapped it lightly, and listened closely to the sound it made. He smiled faintly as though the yacht had finally whispered its secret. The crowd leaned closer, eager to know. But the poor dad said nothing yet. He wiped his hands, closed his toolbox halfway, and stood up slowly. His eyes met his daughter's first. She gave him a nod full of faith. Then he turned to the woman and said, "Madam, I think I know what's wrong. But fixing it is not about force or expensive machines. It's about patience." The woman raised her chin, half curious and half mocking. "Go on then," she said. "Prove it." The poor dad bent down again, carefully loosening one connection. The smell of fuel grew stronger, and he signaled for someone to step back. With delicate movements, he reached inside the valve. His wire touched something soft once more. This time he pulled gently. Slowly, piece by piece, something strange came out. It looked like a small piece of cloth, old and dirty, stuck deep inside. Gasps filled the air. The engineers widened their eyes. How could they have missed something so simple? The woman stared in disbelief. For months, expensive tools and high-level experts had searched for complex problems, but none had thought to check for something basic. Yet here it was, the cause of all her frustration. A tiny piece of cloth blocking the system. The poor dad held it up silently, letting everyone see. Then he looked at his daughter. She beamed at him, her face glowing with pride. She had always believed in him, and now the whole harbor could see why. The man did not smile arrogantly. He simply placed the cloth aside and began to clean the valve carefully. His daughter continued holding the light steady, her small hands never shaking. The crowd grew excited, whispering to one another that maybe, just maybe, the yacht would finally work again. The woman's lips tightened, her pride struggling against the truth. She wanted to deny it, to say it was luck, but deep inside she knew. This poor man had seen what 30 engineers had not. And as the man continued his quiet work, a new story began to write itself at the harbor. A story not of wealth or arrogance, but of patience, skill, and a father's love reflected in his daughter's eyes. The poor dad stood quietly on the yacht, the small piece of dirty cloth still in his hand. The crowd around the dock could not believe their eyes. Something so small, so ordinary, had stopped such a grand machine for months. The rich woman stared at the cloth as if it were some cruel joke played on her. She had spent thousands on famous engineers, imported equipment, and endless repairs, yet not one of them had thought to look here. The man did not celebrate or boast. He only placed the cloth gently aside and continued his work. He took a small brush from his toolbox and carefully cleaned the valve and the pipe. His movements were slow but steady, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. His daughter leaned forward, holding her flashlight high so he could see better. Her little face glowed with pride, and she whispered softly, "I knew you could do it, Papa." Her words filled him with warmth. He did not need applause from the crowd or even thanks from the woman. His greatest reward was already shining from his daughter's eyes. He smiled at her before turning back to the engine. He checked the pipes again, making sure no other blockages remained. He tightened the connections carefully, wiping away the extra grease. Then he tested the switches slowly, listening to the way the engine clicked. Every sound mattered to him. The crowd watched in silence, as though afraid to break the spell of concentration. One of the engineers who had worked on the yacht before stepped closer, shaking his head. "I cannot believe this," he muttered. "All our machines, all our training, and we missed this simple problem." His colleague sighed. "Sometimes knowledge makes us look too far ahead. We forget the basics." The poor dad overheard them but said nothing. He knew it was true. His own father had once told him, When you fix a boat, never start with the big problems. Always look for the small ones first. It is often the smallest stone that stops the wheel. That wisdom had guided him all his life. Finally, he finished cleaning and reassembled the part. He closed his toolbox and stood up. His daughter's heart raced with excitement. "Is it ready now, Papa?" she asked eagerly. He nodded gently. "Yes, little one. Let's see if the yacht wants to breathe again." The woman, though still doubtful, could not hide her curiosity. She stepped forward impatiently. "So? What now?" she asked. The man looked at her calmly. "Now, madam, you try starting it." The crowd grew tense. Fishermen leaned closer, children stood on tiptoes, and even the engineers crossed their arms, waiting to see what would happen. The woman scoffed, but her hand trembled slightly as she turned the key in the ignition. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, with a sudden deep roar, the engine came alive. The yacht trembled slightly under the power of its own heart beating once more. A strong, steady sound filled the dock. The crowd gasped, and then burst into loud cheers. The poor dad stood silently, his hands resting on his toolbox while his daughter clapped with joy. Her small voice rang louder than the others. "Papa fixed it! Papa fixed it!" She jumped up and down with happiness, her pigtails bouncing. The woman froze, her mouth slightly open. For months she had watched failure after failure, yet this poor man had done what seemed impossible. Her pride was crushed, but she could not deny the truth before her. She turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. How did you do that?" she asked, almost in disbelief. The man looked at her with calm respect. "It was nothing magical, madam. Just patience, listening, and remembering what my father taught me. The boat was not broken. It only needed someone to look at the small things." His words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. The crowd nodded. Many people had tried to impress the woman with complex explanations, but this man reminded everyone of something important. Wisdom was not always about education or money. Sometimes it came from experience and humility. The engineers felt embarrassed. They had been so focused on showing their knowledge that they had missed the obvious. Yet, instead of anger, some of them looked at the man with respect. One even stepped forward and said, "Sir, you have taught us something today. We forgot to listen to the boat, thank you." The man only shook his head. "I did not teach you. The boat did." His daughter smiled proudly. To her, her father was a hero. She ran to him when he stepped off the yacht and hugged his waist tightly. "I told you, Papa. You can fix anything." The dock remained lively for a long time. People talked about the miracle they had just seen. They told the story to newcomers, pointing at the poor man and his little daughter. Children looked at him with admiration, while older fishermen nodded with approval. The woman, however, stood in silence. For the first time, she did not know what to say. Her pride battled with her gratitude. She wanted to dismiss his work as luck, but deep in her heart, she knew the truth. Without him, her yacht would still be lifeless. Finally, she stepped closer and spoke in a quieter voice than anyone had ever heard from her. "You have done what no one else could. I underestimated you." The poor dad bowed his head slightly. "It is all right, madam. I only did what I could." But his daughter looked straight into the woman's eyes with innocent boldness. "My papa is the best," she said firmly. For a brief moment, even the rich woman felt a flicker of respect for the little girl's faith. She sighed and turned away, hiding her emotions behind her usual proud face. But everyone around knew her heart had been touched. The yacht continued to hum strongly, as if celebrating its return to life. The sound of its engine blended with the cheers of the crowd, the laughter of children, and the cries of the seagulls overhead. It was not just a machine working again. It was a story being written in the memory of everyone present. That day, the poor dad did not only fix a yacht. He reminded the whole harbor of a lesson. Greatness does not always come with a uniform, a degree, or a big title. Sometimes it comes from a quiet man with an old toolbox and the love of a little girl who never stops believing in him. The engine of the yacht roared steadily, its deep hum echoing across the harbor like a victorious song. For months it had been silent, a symbol of failure and wasted money. But now it was alive again. The sound drew more people to the dock, and soon a crowd gathered, pointing and whispering about the poor man who had achieved the impossible. Children clapped, fishermen nodded with pride, and even the engineers stood quietly, humbled by the simple truth that they had overlooked. The poor dad stood with his old toolbox at his side. He wiped his hands with his cloth and gave a small smile to his daughter. She was glowing with joy, her little hand still holding the flashlight as if it had been her part in the repair. To her it was more than a yacht running. It was her father proving to the world what she had always known. He was clever, capable, and strong in ways that no one else could see. The woman, however, struggled to hide her emotions. She had spent months shouting at engineers, demanding answers, and paying enormous sums of money. Yet none of them had fixed her yacht. And now this man, with his simple clothes and rusty tools, had restored it in less than 2 hours. She felt her pride slipping away. She wanted to be angry, but the truth stood in front of her, undeniable. She cleared her throat and asked, trying to keep her voice steady, How did you do it?" The poor dad turned to her, his expression calm. "Madam, sometimes the biggest problems are caused by the smallest things. Everyone was searching for something complicated, but the yacht only needed someone to check the basics." The woman looked at the cloth he had pulled out of the valve earlier. That little piece of fabric had held her luxury boat hostage for months. The thought made her cheeks burn with shame. She glanced at the engineers, who lowered their eyes. None of them dared to speak. The daughter, however, lifted her chin proudly and said, "I told my papa he could fix it. He always fixes everything." Her innocent confidence made the crowd smile. Many of them whispered about how beautiful it was to see a child believe so deeply in her father. The poor man bent down and stroked his daughter's hair gently. "You gave me courage, little one. Without you, I might not have tried." The woman shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, she saw clearly the bond between father and daughter. It was something her wealth could never buy: trust, love, and faith. She sighed and finally admitted in a quiet voice, "You have done what 30 engineers could not. I cannot ignore that." The crowd clapped again, this time louder. Some even shouted praises for the poor dad. "He's the real genius," one fisherman cried. Another added, "Books and degrees can't replace heart and patience." Their voices carried across the dock, and the poor man felt a wave of respect he had never known before. The woman straightened her back, still fighting against her pride. She reached into her purse and pulled out a bundle of notes. She extended it toward the poor dad. "Take this," she said firmly. "You deserve to be rewarded." The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what he would do. To many, this was the dream, a poor man finally receiving a rich reward. But the father surprised everyone. He shook his head gently and said, "I do not need all this, madam. Just enough to support my daughter's schooling will be enough." Gasps rose from the people nearby. Even the woman blinked in surprise. "You refuse this?" she asked sharply. "Do you know how much this is?" The poor dad smiled humbly. "I know, madam, but I do not work for wealth. I work for my family. Knowledge is the best treasure I can give my daughter. That is all I ask." The daughter's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of love. She hugged her father tightly. "Papa, you're the best," she whispered. The crowd erupted in admiration. Men clapped his shoulders, women smiled warmly, and even the engineers nodded with respect. They realized that this man was not only skilled but wise. He had taught them a lesson greater than any book could provide. The woman hesitated, her pride still heavy. But deep down she felt something she hadn't in years: humility. She carefully pulled out a smaller amount and handed it to him. "For her schooling," she said softly, "and thank you." The father accepted it with gratitude, bowing his head. His daughter held his hand tightly, her heart swelling with pride. Meanwhile, the yacht continued to hum steadily, as if celebrating its freedom. Its engine sound mixed with the cheers of the people, making the moment unforgettable. The harbor, once filled with gossip and laughter at the woman's failed attempts, was now buzzing with respect for the poor dad and his little girl. The engineers, one by one, approached the man. "You have shown us something important," one admitted. "We were too focused on complex solutions. We forgot to start small. Today you reminded us of the basics." The father nodded humbly. "Every boat has its language. You just have to listen." His words spread among the crowd like a quiet wind. People repeated them, knowing they had witnessed something special. The woman stood silently, her eyes on the water. She thought about her pride, her wealth, and how quickly she had judged the poor man. For the first time, she saw her own mistake clearly. She had mocked him, expecting failure, but he had given her success. The truth humbled her. The little girl, unaware of the woman's inner battle, tugged her father's hand and said cheerfully, "Papa, can we go home now?" He nodded with a soft smile. "Yes, little one. Our work here is done." But as they began to walk away, the crowd followed them with their eyes. To them, he was no longer just a poor handyman. He was proof that greatness could come from unexpected places. He was the father who had taught a whole harbor the value of patience, humility, and love. The woman watched them leave, her heart heavy yet lighter than before. For once, she did not shout or complain. She only whispered to herself, "Perhaps money cannot buy everything after all." And the yacht, standing proudly in the water once again, seemed to agree, its steady hum echoing like an endless reminder of the lesson everyone had just learned. The harbor slowly grew quiet again as the crowd began to leave. But the story of what had happened that day would not be forgotten. Fishermen carried it with them to the market. Children repeated it at school, and even the engineers whispered about it in embarrassment. The tale spread quickly. A poor dad had solved the mystery of the yacht after 30 trained experts had failed. For the poor man, however, it was not a story of fame. As he walked home with his daughter, carrying his old toolbox in one hand and her small hand in the other, he felt no pride in showing the world his skill. His heart was full only because his daughter had stood beside him the whole time, believing in him when no one else did. The little girl walked happily, her steps light with joy. "Papa," she said softly, "today everyone saw what I always knew. You can fix anything." The father smiled, looking down at her bright eyes. "Not everything, little one," he replied humbly. "But today I fixed what mattered." When they reached their small home, she placed the little flashlight on the table like a treasure. To her, it was proof that she had helped, that she had been part of the moment that changed everything. The father placed the money he had received into a jar marked with her name. It was their school fund, and he added every coin and note he could save. That day, the jar grew a little fuller. Meanwhile, back at the harbor, the woman sat alone on her now working yacht. The sound of the engine still echoed in her ears, not as a victory, but as a lesson. She thought about how quickly she had mocked the poor man, how blind she had been to the simple truth that wisdom was not always dressed in wealth. For years she had believed money could solve every problem. But here, in front of everyone, her pride had been broken by a man with nothing but love for his child and skills learned from his father. That night she could not sleep. The image of the little girl holding the flashlight haunted her thoughts. She realized she had seen something she had never experienced herself, pure trust, the kind that money could not buy. For the first time in many years, she wished she had something so simple yet so strong in her own life. In the following days, the story continued to grow. Newspapers printed small articles about the poor man who had repaired the yacht. People who had never spoken to him before greeted him on the street, calling him clever and wise. Yet he remained the same, fixing bicycles, nets, and small boats, carrying his old toolbox wherever he went. He accepted the greetings with a gentle nod, but never let the attention change his humble ways. His daughter, however, felt proud every day. She walked taller, telling her friends, "My papa fixed the yacht that no one else could." Some laughed at first, not believing her, but when the grown-ups confirmed the story, their eyes widened. Soon even the children admired her father, and she glowed with happiness. One afternoon, as the poor dad worked on a fisherman's broken net, the woman appeared at the dock again. This time she was not surrounded by engineers or speaking in her usual loud voice. She walked slowly, carrying a book in her hand. People noticed her change immediately. Her face was softer and her steps were calm. She approached the poor dad quietly and said, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for fixing my yacht, but for teaching me something important." The man looked up from his work, surprised. "I taught you nothing, madam, you taught yourself," but she shook her head. "No. You showed me that money cannot solve everything and pride cannot replace patience. You reminded me that wisdom often lives in places we ignore." She handed him the book. "This is for your daughter. It is a set of stories about people who changed the world with simple acts. I think she will like it." The girl accepted it with shining eyes. "Thank you," she said politely. She hugged the book close to her chest, already imagining her father reading the stories to her at night. The woman smiled faintly at the child, and then turned to the father. "You are rich in ways I am not, and for that I respect you." With those words, she left quietly, leaving the dock more thoughtful than she had arrived. The poor dad returned to his work, but his heart felt lighter. He had not only fixed a yacht, he had touched a life, maybe even changed it. His daughter skipped around him happily, opening the book and showing him the pictures inside. Weeks passed and the story of the yacht became a legend in the small town. Visitors came to the harbor, pointing at the place where the poor man had fixed the luxury boat. Some even asked him for advice on their machines, but he always gave the same answer: start with the small things. The small things often matter the most. His daughter grew more determined in her studies, inspired by the respect her father had earned. Every evening, they read from the book the woman had given her. The girl listened with wide eyes as her father told her stories of inventors, leaders, and dreamers who had changed the world. Each time he ended with the same words: "Remember, little one, greatness is not in wealth. It is in patience, kindness, and never giving up." And so the story of that day lived on, not just as a tale of a yacht and a poor man, but as a lesson for everyone. The harbor remembered, the engineers remembered, and even the woman remembered. She treated people differently after that, with more respect and less pride. The poor dad continued his life as he always had, humble and hardworking. But for his daughter, he was no longer just her papa. He was her hero, the man who had shown the world that true intelligence is not measured by money, but by heart. And every time they passed the harbor and saw the yacht shining proudly in the water, the girl would whisper, "That's the boat you fixed, Papa," and he would smile gently, replying, "No, little one, that's the lesson we fixed together."